last felt about the right place where we should be starting, and I guess that's down to just that word on the screen there, Dixons. When you start to talk to people in terms of what they think about Dixons, it's kind of a brand that's stuck in a bit of a time warp, and you can see the kind of original brick phone, and it's kind of anchored there by all these products, whether or not it's Pac-Man or Atari or one of the original Seiko watches. But I guess the problem with being anchored in those sorts of products is consumer tech moves on, and also the high street retailing's moved on. So what actually happened to Dixons is, one night they had a nationwide footprint of high street stores where people would walk in, walk out, you get natural footfalls, a lot of familiarity. And then the owner, DSG International, turned Dixons into Courage Digital. So what happened is, overnight, our business went from being a high street retailer in Dixons through to a very different proposition, which is an online-only tech retailer. Now, if you have a look at, if you like, what's happened in quantitative terms, sort of Millwall tracking, you can see pretty quickly that it doesn't do too badly on awareness. You've got 75% awareness. Sorry, we'll just try to shrink that chart as much as possible. So you've got 75% awareness, and it quickly cascades down. And when you look at what happens to consideration, it's down at 1%. So we kind of had a real problem in terms of we've got massive amounts of familiarity. That's great. Everybody knows it. Next to no one would consider going. So where you sum this up, in terms of the challenge for the brand, as Dixons was the last place people would visit.
And whilst that's problematic on so many levels, there's a particular business problem that rubbed into and summed up in these 3 words: pay-per-click. Because basically what the client was having to do, or we were having to do, was use price aggregators and good old AdWords to send people to the site instead of the high street traffic, which used to naturally take people there. And whilst a lot of people probably think, pay-per-click's one of the better inventions of the modern world, not if your business looks like this. That's not to say that we sold lots of Atari Pac-Man machines, but that we were a business with very high costs. It's no secret that margins are slender in this market, so we're laden with high cost of goods, high costs across the board. And the problem is, a click on a term like LCD TV costs us £1.60 a pop. Which is eye-watering when you consider that it takes tens of those such clicks before someone might actually end up buying from us. You could do the maths on that. And essentially what happened is the cost per click was taking a substantial bite out of already slender margins. And so the brief essentially was, we've got to give people a reason to come direct to us in the first instance.
So we duly dug into the consumer buying process, just to try and see where we could find a foothold. And I guess, we started off with what people want and what they need, and we started to research, and we used consumer diaries, and just to try and plot out all the stages on the journey, just to try and find a place of where Dixons could play a part. And very quickly, a journey started to appear, which looks something like this contrived squiggle on a page. But in reality, what happens is people will start off trying to, generally find some sort of parameters for the market, and they'll read things like what hi-fi. Invariably, they will then go into store and do a bit of tire kicking and kind of touch the levers and the knobs and have a little look at that and probably watch some TV at the same time. Inevitably, there's been the rise of kind of peer-to-peer recommendations of what people look for, just to try and get it from the horse's mouth. There is the inevitable 2-pint chat about pixels and memory and Guinness at the pub, just to chew it over with your mates. And finally, when you kind of think you're starting to narrow that funnel, you broadly know what you want, the size that you want, you're kind of into make and model, then you will then head into a store where you can talk to a very friendly shop assistant who will, if you like, give you a bit of his expert advice. You can sign on the line. And just about when you think you've got to that point, you will probably turn around and see something like that, which will then, of course, throw all that decision-making out the window and send you right back to the internet. So, I think the moral of that is, it's a very long, contrived, complex customer journey that we were looking at. There's multiple sources and multiple sources of help to guide people through. And I guess that, what we were trying to do is find a reason to come direct to Dixons. And what it sent to us is the natural place to try and coax people in, given that it was such a long journey, is to try and put our communications and communicate with them at the start of this purchase process to try and guide them through to ultimately making their purchase with us.
Of course, you've probably already worked this out. The problem with that was, back to this old chestnut, people's baggage about what the brand represented. Because you say to someone, what does service look like at Dixons? And they've got a picture of it like this. Saturday boys, pretty clueless, you know. And the general prejudice was that even though there were no more Saturday boys because we had no more staff, that would still continue to the rubbishness would continue on the site. Never mind, we thought we'll do what the industry is always telling us to do. We will interrogate the product, and it will tell us where it's good, because we had a new product effectively, .co.uk. So we organised some accompanied surfing, and we watched people go around it. But what they said was, the problem is it feels like it's written for this sort of person, someone who's really interested in terabytes and gigaflops and, you know, three-letter acronyms of various sorts. You know, someone who's just a little bit unnaturally interested in technology. And combined with that, there's a healthy lacing of this going on as well. You know, you really got to buy from this store straight away. And when we dug around the site architecture, navigating around it, we worked out that the site architecture looks a bit like this. It was just all over the place. You really couldn't sort of get anywhere you wanted to go without getting lost or feeling that you were sold to. As this sort of data indicates, so this is, I've had to cover various bits up, this is satisfaction with accompanied surfing quantitatively. You can see we're in not a good place there. However, there was one really good thing that came out of all of this, a piece of sort of brutal honesty, if you like. We managed to agree the following thing with a client, and we were thinking about what would it take to get someone to buy in this situation, and we agreed this with them. That in reality, the only realistic way someone will buy from their site is if they visit knowing exactly the make and model that they want. Because if you type in Panasonic C45, you'll find it, and there's a good chance you'll buy it.
Okay. So I guess the key point there is, you know, trying to get someone to visit knowing exactly the make and model that they want, and that's kind of fine and that's cool when you look at it on paper. But I suppose fundamentally, you still need to try and convert that deal when they come to you. You know, why should they ultimately buy from you? And I guess when we dug in the locker, the only thing that was left lingering was a price guarantee. And I guess, you know, we've all experienced price guarantees, whether in personal life or professionally, trying to build something around them. And I suppose to some extent I have a deep scepticism of price guarantees. There's always a kind of proximity and whether you can throw a cat to it. But I think, you know, the bigger problem for us was whether it was differentiating and whether it was worth people coming to the store. So we were deeply sceptical, but nevertheless, we sort of ploughed on and thought, well, let's just apply it to a product. We picked an LCD 42 LDV5 0U, simply not because that exact make and model represents the market, but nevertheless, you know, if you want to think about consumer tech and consumer electronics, a good thing to do is just think about the big flat screen TV, you know, and it's a fair assumption that they'll have other things. And what we very quickly found when we ran it is you kind of get a ranking in terms of the different stores. And what you can see up to about the 379 mark, or actually 369 mark, is that there's a kind of bear pit of online-only brands from Dixons down, which kind of punch it out and fight it out in the real gritty, grubby end of kind of retailing. You know, it's very hard to try and do anything around that. If you start to slide your way up, you can see the likes of Comet, so the out-of-town retailers, Comet and Best Buy, they are more 429.99. And you start to see a little bit of a gap opening up. And of course, where the real gaps really start to show themselves is when you start to look at the Harrods or the John Lewis of this world, or even the 639 at Selfridges. Now, that's kind of interesting in some ways. Obviously, that doesn't quite represent real life because the consumer can kind of go where they want to go. But what it does mean for communications is it's kind of interesting because we realise that our price guarantee only really gained any traction and only really started to make sense when you frame it against department stores. So we have to try and draw a comparison against the two.
That left us this right old conundrum, which was, if you think about department stores, they've got the knowledge, the expertise, the service, but as we saw there, they haven't got the lowest prices. We've got the lowest prices, but we haven't got the service. And we were flummoxed by that for a while until we sort of went back to this guy and we put ourselves in the head of someone lost in this journey, lost in this jungle. And what was interesting about that is you think about it from a customer's perspective, competitors is not really the right word because they don't really care that they're competitors. What they're sort of their framework's more about assists. They're looking for people that will help them bounce from one thing to another and get to where they're going for. And they're looking for help. So we thought, in a world where, in a kind of ecosystem where there's loads of bits of stimulus and loads of brands and things helping everyone ultimately get somewhere, we thought, well, not every brand needs to be equally good at everything in this ecosystem. So we thought, aha, that's interesting. So here's our dilemma. What about if we thought of it like this? We've got the lowest prices, and they do the knowledge and the service for us. So essentially we'd said, well, look, we know, going back to this old screen, we know that we've got to anchor the proposition right at the meaty end of it, at the Panasonic C45, whatever it's called. But to do that, we're quite happy to say to people to go and do the following. You know, essentially, we're quite happy to send people to the high street, to have a jolly good look round, to wander around, identify exactly what they want, and then, and only then, come to us to buy it. And that became the sort of critical, the task insight on our brief. And the proposition which falls out of that is in 3 words: visit us last.
So we duly built a brief around that, which we can kind of hand round, but there's a bit of detail on that, and it's probably not worth reading through that now. But you know, we had this kind of key thought that we thought was pretty interesting, and just in the interest of time, just so we're not talking about kind of briefings and any stimulus, I thought it's probably easiest if we just give it to you straight from the mouth of Graham.
A truly great brief comes along, but a fantastic insight. I remember reading one of such brief on a Monday morning, and it jumped out at me like proverbial dog's bollocks. I actually remember saying, "Fuck me, this is great." It came up with a proposition that said, "Dixons, visit us last." A brutally simple insight, which immediately led to some great ideas. 24 hours later, we'd written the entire campaign. Great work comes from great briefs. I just wish it were more.
So, as Graham said, you know, very, very quickly, they got to this work, and in particular, that line, which is Dixons, the last place you want to go to.
Our media strategy was to goal mooch. In the sense that this was our media plan, we said, let's put it all in the real world, because this is about comparison with real world shops, on the missions to Oxford Street to have a look at the stores. So a heavy use of underground, as it happens, heavy use of stations like Knightsbridge, Bond Street, Oxford Street, don't quite know why, but we did. Metro Magazine, Capital Radio, etc., etc. That was the backbone of the plan, but actually, as it happens, PR was the sort of main beneficiary of this, because as it happened, our competitors contributed way more to the exposure than we actually paid for. And we're in the joyous position to be able to show you that happening.
But there's trouble brewing. The online market is fiercely competitive. And a major rival is on the attack. Step into Little England's best-loved department store, where an awfully well-brought-up young man will bend over backwards to single out the TV for you, and then go to Dixons.co.uk and buy it.
You've seen this, haven't
I haven't seen it.
Helen Dickinson is head of PR.
you? I mean, when I show it to partners, they are pretty horrified and say, what are we going to do? You had a small discussion. Did you come to any
We
conclusions?
discussed at JLMB lunch yesterday, and the feeling was that we shouldn't just let it lie.
No, right.
But the other feeling was that a legal challenge was probably not the right way to go. So it's not responding directly to that, but we should go back in a appropriate responsive, unriled, just sort of superior way. Yeah, it is clever.
It is. But it's made the noise they wanted. In PR terms, this works.
Yeah, that's true.
So about £2.5 million worth of PR off the back of about £500,000 worth of paid for advertising. And actually, interestingly, about 2.3 million retweets on the topic, just to show how it was really kind of kicked around amongst the public at large. When they did eventually respond, it was actually quite a substantial response, because they altered the never knowingly undersold policy, or as it should be called, the never ever knowing undersold policy. Because actually for years they had not considered the price of online goods in the policy, and they made this sweeping statement, we're now going to consider the price of online goods, except from certain web stores, which included us. So we created another advert that was all about, they've all got some always best price policy that applies to some websites. And then go to Dixons.
Okay, so excuse me. You've seen the response from Middle England, and there were some more legal challenges that came. So what we haven't got are sales figures, and what we haven't got are profit figures. So we can't kind of show you any increases in those. What we can show you at least, what we can do is show you at least increase in site traffic, and we've split it by London. You know, it was a London-only campaign. In effect, it was all free media that took it. Nationwide, and you can see there's an increase. You know, it's roughly about 30% in terms of it going up. Outside London, again, remember this is all free. It's 12% in terms of what happened. Now, you know, at the end of the day, that is redirected and that's direct to the site. So what we've done is recut it so you can see when you actually just look at it in terms of outside London, direct to site. So, you know, essentially, there's no pay-per-click cost coming in. It's a 48% increase. But the better news story is that when you look outside London, it's a 234%.
Inside London.
Sorry, inside London. It's a 234% increase.
So just to try and wind up, convention has it, and I think we sort of feel this quite strongly normally, that what you do when you're doing these things is you look for strengths. We, in fact, found it, in this case, much more helpful to accept that we had some weaknesses. You know, you get obsessed with the idea that you've got competitors and you must beat them. We found it more useful to use the competitors along the way. And we're taught to look for the reason why all the time. You know, what's the reason why? As it happens in this case, as I hope we've shown, it was the moment when that was much more important than the reason why. The reason why is only implied in what we talk about. And so we think the main thing that we've sort of discovered, the main thing we talk about when we talk about this case is it's all about creating what we're calling a unique telling point. It's the precise moment in the journey where our offer has the most maximum value, and that's the sort of lasting legacy of this paper. So, last paper, you're all done. I just thought I'd say one thing before we close. I'm going to make a request, actually, which is I am absolutely convinced that you will have seen some fantastic planning over the last 2 days. You'll have seen some really emotive subjects, you know, life and death stuff, really glamorous stuff. You'll have seen some really ingenious products that either work really well or were sort of very innovative, some really clever use of channels and all sorts of clever and outstanding bits of sort of planning thinking. We didn't have any of those. We had last, really, as our thing, and we turned that into our unique telling point, and that's where we created all these things. So the request I'm going to make is, as you go off and do your judging, and in particular, when you go and make the final judging decision, we'd like you to go and do this.